The crack of bone against wood silenced the dinner table as Lydia Zimmerman's hand collided with the edge of the heavy oak table, her father-in-law's iron grip forcing it downward with a violence that stole the breath from her lungs. Her husband, Marcus, sat frozen in his chair, eyes downcast as they always were when his father turned cruel. The older man, Robert Zimmerman, stood over her with fury etched into every line of his weathered face, his breathing heavy and deliberate in the thick silence that followed. The pain shooting up Lydia's arm was nothing compared to the sick realization that Marcus would do nothing, say nothing, be nothing in this moment when she needed him most. 3 years of marriage had taught her that bitter lesson over and over again. "You will not speak to me that way in my own house," Robert hissed, finally releasing her hand. "A woman's place is to listen, not to question her betters." Lydia cradled her throbbing hand against her chest, feeling something grinding wrong inside the bones. All she had done was suggest that perhaps they should pay the ranch hands what they had been promised, rather than cutting their wages again. The men who worked the Zimmerman Ranch outside Marfa, Texas, in this summer of 1881 were already barely scraping by, and she had seen their families going hungry. But suggesting anything, having any opinion at all, was seen as rebellion in this household. Marcus finally looked up, but his words were directed at her, not his father. "You should go lie down, Lydia. You look unwell." The dismissal stung worse than the injury. She stood on shaking legs, still clutching her hand, and walked out of the dining room with what remained of her dignity. Behind her, she heard Robert's voice, calmer now, asking Marcus about the cattle count for the week, as if nothing had happened, as if he had not just deliberately injured his son's wife for daring to have a conscience. In the bedroom she shared with Marcus, Lydia sat on the edge of the bed and carefully examined her hand. Her fingers were already swelling, and when she tried to move them, white-hot pain lanced up her arm. 2 fingers sat at an odd angle, and she suspected they were broken. The side of her hand where it had struck the table was already darkening with bruising. She had no one to turn to. Her own parents had died of fever 2 years before she married Marcus, leaving her alone at 18 with no family and few options. Marcus had seemed kind enough during their brief courtship, quiet and steady. She hadn't realized that his quietness was cowardice, his steadiness the immobility of a man who would never stand up to his tyrannical father. She had not known that marrying Marcus meant living under Robert's rule, subject to his every cruel whim. The ranch was isolated, miles from Marfa proper. Robert controlled everything, including whether Lydia was permitted to go into town. In 3 years, she had been allowed perhaps a dozen trips, always with Marcus or Robert accompanying her, always with her purchases and conversations monitored. She was less a wife than a prisoner, and tonight had proven that even the illusion of courtesy that usually governed their interactions could be shattered in an instant. She did not sleep that night. The pain was too intense, and Marcus, when he finally came to bed, turned his back to her without a word. In the darkness, she made a decision. She would leave. She did not know how or where she would go, but she could not stay in this house any longer. The injury to her hand had clarified something that had been building for months. She would rather face an uncertain future alone than continue to live in this gilded cage. Morning came with its usual demands. Robert expected breakfast at 6 sharp, and neither injury nor illness was an acceptable excuse for failure to provide it. Lydia rose in the pre-dawn darkness, her hands swollen to nearly twice its normal size now, the pain a constant throb that made her nauseous. She managed to dress herself one-handed and made her way to the kitchen. Cooking was a nightmare. She could barely hold anything and several times had to stop and breathe through waves of dizziness. But she got biscuits in the oven, bacon in the pan, coffee boiling. When Marcus came down, he glanced at her hand but said nothing. When Robert appeared, he looked at her with cold satisfaction, as if pleased to see the results of his handiwork. "Your biscuits are burnt," he said, pushing his plate away after a single bite. They were not burnt. They were perhaps slightly darker than usual, but perfectly edible. Lydia said nothing. She had learned her lesson about speaking up in this house. After breakfast, Marcus left with Robert to ride out and check the fences on the north pasture. Lydia was left alone with Maria, the housekeeper who came 3 days a week. Maria was a woman of 50 with kind eyes and gentle hands, and when she saw Lydia's injury, she gasped. "Senora, your hand, what happened?" "I fell," Lydia lied automatically. The walls had ears in this house, and she did not know who might report her words back to Robert. Maria's expression said she did not believe the lie, but she did not press. "You need a doctor. This is very serious." "I cannot go to town." It was simple fact. Robert had the only carriage, and both men had ridden out on the only 2 horses that were kept close to the house. The other horses were kept in pastures far from the main buildings, an arrangement that she now understood was quite deliberate. It ensured that she could never simply saddle a horse and leave. "Then I will bring the doctor here when I go home," Maria said firmly. "No." Lydia caught her arm with her good hand. "Please. It will only make things worse. I will manage." Maria looked at her for a long moment, and Lydia saw understanding dawn in her eyes. Understanding and deep sadness. "Senora, you cannot live like this." "I know," Lydia whispered. "I am going to leave, but I need to plan it carefully." They spoke in hushed voices while they worked, Lydia one-handed and clumsy, Maria taking on more than her share without complaint. By the time Maria had to leave in the early afternoon, they had the beginning of a plan. Maria would ask around discreetly, find out if anyone needed help, if anyone might take in a woman alone. She would report back in 3 days when she returned. But 3 days proved too long to wait. That evening, Robert came into the kitchen while Lydia was preparing dinner. Marcus was upstairs washing up, and they were alone. Robert moved close to her, too close, and when she tried to step away, he caught her injured hand in his grip. The pain was so intense that her vision went dark at the edges. "I think you need another lesson about respect," he said quietly. "Marcus is too soft with you. But I am not my son." He squeezed, and Lydia heard herself make a sound she did not recognize, something animal and desperate. When he finally let go, she collapsed against the counter, cradling her hand and fighting not to vomit from the pain. "Dinner in 30 minutes, Robert said, and walked out. Lydia stood there shaking for several minutes before she could move again. When Marcus came down and saw her white face and trembling hands, he frowned slightly. "Are you ill?" "No," she managed. "I am fine." Dinner was a silent affair. Lydia could barely eat, and she saw Robert watching her with something that might have been satisfaction or might have been anticipation. When it was over and the dishes were done, she went upstairs and packed a small bag with shaking hands. She took only what she could carry: a change of clothes, her mother's Bible, the few dollars she had managed to save from the egg money over the years. It was not much, but it would have to be enough. She waited until the house was dark and silent. Marcus snored softly beside her, and she could hear Robert's heavier breathing from the room down the hall. Moving as quietly as she could, Lydia slipped out of bed, already dressed in her traveling clothes. She had left her boots by the door, and she carried them down the stairs rather than risk the sound of her footsteps. The front door creaked when she opened it, and she froze, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. But no sound came from upstairs. She slipped outside into the cool night air. The walk to Marfa was 15 miles. She had no horse, no water, and an injured hand that throbbed with every beat of her heart. But she had her freedom, or at least the hope of it, and that was enough to keep her moving. The road was pale in the moonlight, a ribbon of dust stretching away toward town. She started walking. By dawn, she had covered perhaps 8 miles. Her feet ached, her hand was agony, and she was so thirsty her tongue felt thick in her mouth, but behind her she could see no signs of pursuit. Perhaps Marcus had not yet noticed her absence. Perhaps Robert was still asleep. She allowed herself a brief rest, sitting on a rock beside the road, before pushing on. The sun climbed higher, and the heat became oppressive. This was high desert country, and even in early summer the temperature could be brutal. Lydia's water bottle, such as it was, had been empty for hours. She was beginning to stumble, her vision blurring at the edges, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. Terror gave her a burst of energy. She tried to run, but her exhausted legs would not cooperate. The horse was getting closer. She turned to face her pursuer, determined to at least meet her fate head on rather than be run down from behind. But the man on the horse was not Marcus or Robert. He was a stranger, tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything at a glance. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim, a faded shirt, a hat pulled low against the sun. He pulled his horse to a stop several feet away and dismounted, his movements careful and deliberate, as if he did not want to spook her. "Madam," he said, his voice low and calm, "are you all right?" Lydia meant to say yes, meant to insist she was fine and send him on his way. But instead, to her horror, she felt her knees give out. The stranger caught her before she hit the ground, his arms steady and sure. "Easy now," he said. "I have got you." He helped her sit down in the shade of his horse and produced a canteen from his saddle. The water was warm but tasted like heaven. She drank greedily until he gently pulled the canteen away. "Not too much at once or you will be sick. Small sips." She nodded, still trying to catch her breath. Now that she had stopped moving, every part of her body was screaming in protest. Her feet felt like they were on fire, her hand was swollen and hot to the touch, and exhaustion pulled at her like a weight. "I am Clayton Thorne," the stranger said. "I work the Murphy Ranch about 5 miles north of here. What are you doing out here alone?" "I am walking to Marfa," Lydia said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, thin and distant. "That is still another 7 miles at least. And begging your pardon, madam, but you do not look like you can make another 700 feet. He was right, and they both knew it. Lydia looked down at her injured hand, and Clayton's eyes followed her gaze. His expression changed, hardening into something cold and angry. "Who did that to you?" "I fell," she said automatically. "That is not from a fall." His voice was flat. "Those fingers are broken, and badly. Someone did that to you on purpose." Lydia said nothing. Clayton studied her for a moment, then seemed to come to a decision. "All right, here is what we are going to do. I am going to take you to my place. It is close, and you can rest there while I ride to town and fetch the doctor. Then we will figure out what comes next. I cannot impose. It is not an imposition. You need help, and I am offering it." He held out his hand. "Can you ride?" "I think so." He helped her to her feet, then boosted her up into the saddle. He swung up behind her, his arms coming around to take the reins. It was improper, riding this way with a strange man, but Lydia found she did not care. She was too tired and hurt to care about propriety. She leaned back against his solid warmth and let her eyes close. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, they were stopping in front of a small but well-kept cabin. Clayton dismounted and helped her down, supporting her when her legs threatened to give out again. "Come on inside," he said. "Let me get a look at that hand." The cabin was simple but clean, with a single large room that served as kitchen, dining room, and living space, and a doorway that presumably led to a bedroom. Clayton helped her to a chair at the table, then went to pump water into a basin. He brought it over, along with some clean cloths and a bottle of whiskey. "This is going to hurt," he said gently. "But I need to clean it and see how bad the damage is." Lydia nodded. She had been in pain for days now. A little more would not kill her. Clayton worked with surprising gentleness, carefully washing away the dirt and sweat. When he examined the break, his jaw tightened. 2 fingers broken, and possibly a bone in your hand as well. This needs to be set properly, or it will heal wrong, and you will never have full use of it again. "I know," Lydia whispered. "I can splint it temporarily, but you need a doctor." He looked up at her, his eyes serious. Who did this to you? Something in his tone, in the genuine concern on his face, broke through the walls she had been maintaining for so long. My father-in-law, she said, and was appalled to hear her voice crack. He was angry because I spoke up about something. He forced my hand down onto the table. And my husband did nothing. He just sat there and watched. Clayton was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said quietly, "You are not going back there. I have nowhere else to go. You will figure that out, but you are not going back to a place where someone breaks your bones for speaking your mind." He stood up and went to a shelf, pulling down a wooden box. From it, he extracted some straight pieces of wood and strips of clean cloth. "First things first, let me splint this properly." The process of setting the bones was agony. Lydia bit down on a leather strap Clayton provided and tried not to scream as he carefully manipulated the broken fingers back into alignment. Sweat poured down her face, and her vision went gray at the edges, but she stayed conscious. When it was done, Clayton wrapped the splint firmly but not too tightly, creating a support that ran from her fingertips to halfway up her forearm. "There," he said, tying off the bandage. "That should hold until the doctor can see you. How does it feel?" "It hurts," Lydia admitted, "but it feels more stable." "Good." He poured her a small glass of whiskey. "Drink this. It will help with the pain." She drank it, coughing at the burn. Clayton watched her with those dark, serious eyes. "You are safe here," he said. "I want you to understand that. In my house, you can speak freely. You can say whatever you think, whatever you feel, and no one will hurt you for it. You understand me?" "Speak freely here," Lydia repeated, and something inside her chest that had been clenched tight for 3 years began to loosen. "Why are you helping me?" "Because it is the right thing to do," Clayton said simply. "And because I do not hold with men who hurt women. My mother was married to a man like your father-in-law before she met my father. I saw what it did to her. I swore I would never stand by and let it happen if I could prevent it. Your mother's first husband hurt her? He did. And one day she gathered her courage and left, taking me with her. I was 5 years old. We had nothing but the clothes on our backs. She worked as a washerwoman, a cook, anything she could find to keep us fed. Then she met my father, a good man who loved her like she deserved. He adopted me, gave me his name. They had 30 good years together before they passed. I am sorry for your loss. It was 3 years back now. They went within a month of each other, like they could not stand to be apart even in death." He smiled slightly. "But the point is, my mother escaped. She built a new life, and you can too. I do not have anything. No money, no family, no prospects. You have yourself. That is more than nothing." Clayton stood up. "I am going to ride to town and fetch the doctor. There is food in the larder. Help yourself to anything you want. The bedroom is through that door if you need to rest. I will be back in a few hours." "Mr. Thorne." "Clayton," he corrected gently. "Clayton, thank you. I do not know how I will ever repay your kindness." "No repayment needed, madam." "Lydia," she said. "My name is Lydia." He smiled, and it transformed his face from serious to almost handsome. "Lydia, that is a good name. You rest now. I will be back soon." After he left, Lydia sat for a long time in the quiet cabin. The pain in her hand had subsided to a dull, manageable throb thanks to the whiskey and the proper splinting. For the first time in 3 years, she felt something like hope. She explored the cabin carefully, not wanting to pry, but curious about the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Everything was neat and well organized. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, cornmeal, dried beans, salt pork. On a shelf in the corner, she found a small collection of books, their spines worn with reading. She pulled one down and found it was a volume of poetry by Walt Whitman. Inside the cover, In a careful hand was written, "To Clayton, may you always find freedom in words. Your loving mother, June Thorne." Lydia felt tears prick her eyes. She carefully replaced the book and went to look out the window. The cabin sat in a small valley, with the Murphy Ranch visible in the distance. The land here was harsh but beautiful, all wide skies and endless horizon. It felt like a place where a person could breathe. Clayton returned in the early afternoon with an older man he introduced as Dr. Samuel Pierce. The doctor examined Lydia's hand with practiced efficiency, tutting at the injury. "That Clayton did a good job with the splint," he said. "Probably as good as I could have done. The bones are set properly. You will need to keep this immobilized for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. And there will need to be exercises after that to regain full mobility." "Will I have full use of my hand again?" Lydia asked. "With time and proper care, I believe so. You are young and healthy, but it was a serious break. If it had not been treated, or if whoever did this had broken more bones." He shook his head. "Well, let us just say you were fortunate that Clayton found you." "Yes," Lydia agreed softly. "I was." Dr. Pierce left her with a bottle of laudanum for the pain and strict instructions about keeping the splint clean and dry. He also left his bill, which Lydia stared at in dismay. She had perhaps $3 to her name, and the bill was for 5. "I will take care of it," Clayton said, seeing her expression. "I cannot let you—" "You can, and you will. Consider it a loan if it makes you feel better. You can pay me back when you are on your feet again." After the doctor left, Clayton made them both lunch, simple fare of bread, cheese, and dried apple slices, but it tasted better than anything Lydia had eaten in months. They ate in companionable silence, and Lydia found herself studying him. He was not a young man, probably in his early 30s, with the weathered look of someone who spent most of his time outdoors, but there was a gentleness to him that belied his rough appearance, a kindness in his eyes that made her feel safe. "What will you do now?" Clayton asked when they had finished eating. "I do not know," Lydia admitted. "I cannot go back to the Zimmerman ranch, but I have nowhere else to go. I suppose I will have to find work in town, but I do not know who would hire a woman with a broken hand." "You could stay here," Clayton said, and then seemed surprised at his own words. "That is, temporarily, until your hand heals and you can work again." "I could use someone to help with the cooking and such. I am not much of a cook myself. I would pay you a fair wage, and you would have room and board." "That would not be proper," Lydia said automatically. "An unmarried woman staying with an unmarried man." "I have been thinking about that. Mrs. Murphy, the ranch owner's wife, she is always needing help with her garden and her preserving. She has a small cottage on the ranch property that sits empty. You could stay there and work for both of us. Split your time between helping her and helping me. That way, no one could say anything improper about the arrangement. It was a lifeline, and Lydia knew she would be a fool not to take it. "Are you certain Mrs. Murphy would agree to this?" "I will ride over and speak to her this afternoon. She is a good woman, and she does not hold with men who abuse their wives. When she hears your story, I think she will be more than willing to help." Lydia felt tears threatening again. "Why are you doing all this for me? You do not even know me." Clayton was quiet for a moment, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I told you about my mother, but I did not tell you everything. When she left her first husband, she walked for 2 days with me in her arms. She had no food, no water, nowhere to go. And a man found her, a farmer. And he gave her work and a place to stay until she could get on her feet. He did not ask for anything in return. He just helped because it was right. My mother never forgot that kindness. She made me promise that if I ever had the chance to help someone the way that farmer helped her, I would do it. So that is what I am doing. I am keeping my promise to my mother." "She raised a good son," Lydia said softly. "She tried her best." Clayton stood up. I am going to go talk to Mrs. Murphy now. You rest. There are books on the shelf if you want something to read, and help yourself to anything in the kitchen. After he left, Lydia did rest, curling up in a chair by the window with a book of poetry. But she found her mind wandering from the words on the page to the man who had shown her such unexpected kindness. Clayton Thorne was unlike any man she had ever met. He was strong but gentle, capable but humble, and he had looked at her with respect, as if her opinions and her words mattered. It was a strange and wonderful feeling. Clayton returned as the sun was beginning to set, and his face was bright with good news. Mrs. Murphy was appalled when I told her what happened to you. She says you are welcome to stay in the cottage for as long as you need, and she would be grateful for help with her garden and her cooking. She does not expect much work from you while your hand is healing, but she says having company will be payment enough. She is a bit lonely out here, with her husband always off with the cattle. That is so generous, Lydia said. I do not know how to thank her. You can thank her when you meet her tomorrow. I will take you over in the morning. Clayton paused. There is one thing, though. She asked if your husband will come looking for you. I told her I did not know. Lydia had been trying not to think about that. I suppose he might, or Robert might. They will be angry that I left. If they come around, you do not have to see them. Mrs. Murphy has ranch hands who can send them away, and I will make it clear that you are under my protection. They will not bother you. You would do that? Stand up to them for me? In a heartbeat, Clayton said, and Lydia believed him. That night, Clayton gave Lydia his bedroom and took a bedroll out to the porch for himself. She protested, but he was firm. You need proper rest to heal. I have slept under the stars more times than I can count. One more night will not hurt me. Lydia lay in Clayton's bed, surrounded by his scent of leather and sage, and felt safer than she had in years. Her hands still ached, and her future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like she might actually have a future to be uncertain about. Morning came with the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Lydia emerged from the bedroom to find Clayton at the stove, cooking breakfast with the ease of long practice. Good morning, he said. How is the hand? Better, I think. The splint helps. Good. Sit down. Breakfast is almost ready. They ate together as the sun rose over the desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. After breakfast, Clayton hitched his horse to a small cart he borrowed from a neighbor, and they made the journey to the Murphy ranch. Mrs. Murphy turned out to be a woman of about 40, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She took one look at Lydia's splinted hand and her thin frame and pulled her into a gentle hug. You poor dear, she said. Clayton told me what happened. You are safe here, do you understand? No man has the right to treat a woman that way, husband or father-in-law or anyone else. Thank you, Mrs. Murphy, Lydia said, her voice thick with emotion. Call me Ruth. Now let me show you the cottage. The cottage was small but charming, with a bedroom, a sitting room, and a tiny kitchen. It was clean and well furnished, with curtains at the windows and a colorful quilt on the bed. It was built for my mother, Ruth explained. She lived here until she passed 2 years ago. It has been empty since, and I am glad to have someone using it again. You make yourself at home, and do not worry about paying rent or anything like that. Having help with the garden and the preserving will be payment enough once your hand heals. Until then, you just focus on getting better. Lydia felt tears sliding down her cheeks. You are both so kind. I do not deserve this. Everyone deserves kindness, Ruth said firmly, and safety. You have had precious little of either, from what Clayton tells me. That changes now. Over the following weeks, Lydia settled into a new routine. Her hand healed slowly but steadily. She spent her mornings at the cottage, learning to manage tasks one-handed, and her afternoons at Ruth's main house, keeping the older woman company and helping with light tasks. 3 days a week, She would walk over to Clayton's cabin and cook dinner for him, returning the kindness he had shown her. It was during these dinners that Lydia began to know Clayton as more than just her rescuer. He was a thoughtful man, well read and intelligent, with a dry sense of humor that often caught her by surprise. He had been working ranches since he was 15, saving every penny, with the dream of someday owning his own spread. He loved the land, loved the work, and spoke about cattle and horses with the passion other men reserved for poetry or women. For her part, Lydia found herself opening up to him in ways she never had with Marcus. She told him about her childhood, her parents, her dreams of becoming a teacher before their deaths had forced her into marriage with a man she barely knew. She told him about the slow suffocation of life at the Zimmerman ranch, the feeling of being trapped, of losing herself piece by piece. "You are finding yourself again now," Clayton said one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. "I can see it. You are more yourself every day." "I feel like I am waking up from a long sleep," Lydia admitted. "Like I forgot who I was, and I am just now remembering." "I am glad," Clayton said softly. "The world needs people who are fully themselves. It is too full of people pretending to be what others expect them to be." A month after Lydia arrived, Marcus and Robert came looking for her. Ruth's ranch foreman, a capable man named Tom, met them at the gate and refused them entry. Lydia watched from the window of the cottage, her heart hammering, as the three men argued. Finally, Clayton appeared, riding up from his cabin. He dismounted and spoke to Marcus and Robert, and although Lydia could not hear what was said, she could see the tension in every line of Clayton's body. The conversation lasted perhaps 5 minutes. Then Marcus and Robert turned their horses and rode away. Clayton spoke to Tom for another minute before mounting his own horse and riding over to the cottage. "They're gone," he said when Lydia opened the door, "and I do not think they will be back." "What did you say to them?" "I told them you were under my protection, and that if they came around here again, I would inform the sheriff in Marfa about what Robert did to your hand. I told them Dr. Pierce had documented the injury and would testify to its cause if necessary. And I told Marcus that if he was any kind of man at all, he would let you go and not trouble you further." "What did Marcus say?" "Not much. His father did most of the talking. But in the end, Marcus agreed to a divorce. He seemed almost relieved, to be honest." "I think he knew he had failed you." Lydia sat down heavily in a chair. "I am free then, truly free." "You are," Clayton confirmed. "The papers will take some time to process, but yes, you are free." That evening, as Lydia prepared dinner in Clayton's kitchen, she realized she was humming. It was such a small thing, but it struck her with the force of revelation. She could not remember the last time she had hummed, the last time she had felt light enough for music. She looked over at Clayton, who was reading in a chair by the window, and felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. She was falling in love with him. The realization should have frightened her, but it did not. Clayton was nothing like Marcus, nothing like any man she had ever known. He was kind and patient, strong and gentle. He treated her like an equal, like her thoughts and opinions mattered, and he had never once tried to take advantage of her vulnerability, never once overstepped the bounds of propriety. But did he feel the same? She could not tell. He was always glad to see her, always seemed to enjoy their conversations, but he had never said or done anything that suggested his feelings went beyond friendship and compassion. Summer deepened into its full heat. Lydia's hand healed, and she was able to remove the splint, though the doctor cautioned her to be careful and to do the exercises he prescribed to regain full strength and flexibility. She threw herself into work, helping Ruth with her garden, which was producing an abundance of tomatoes, beans, squash, and peppers. She learned to make preserves and pickles, to can fruits and vegetables for the winter ahead. She cooked for Clayton 3 evenings a week, always returning to her cottage before dark to maintain propriety. And slowly, carefully, she allowed herself to hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, Clayton felt something for her too. One evening in late July, as they sat on Clayton's porch after dinner, he turned to her with a serious expression. Lydia, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happy here? Truly happy? Because if you are not, if you want something different, I will help you get wherever you want to go. I do not want you to feel trapped here the way you were trapped at the Zimmerman ranch. I am happy, Lydia said, surprised by how much she meant it. Happier than I have been in years, maybe happier than I have ever been. Why do you ask? Because I need to know if you plan to stay, and I need to know if you would be open to something changing between us. Lydia's heart began to race. What kind of change? Clayton took a deep breath. I have feelings for you, Lydia. I have been trying to ignore them, trying to tell myself it is too soon, that you need time to heal from your marriage. But the truth is, I am in love with you. I think I have been since the day I found you on that road. And if there is any chance that you might feel the same way, I would like permission to court you properly. Joy flooded through Lydia, so intense it almost hurt. Clayton, I have been in love with you for weeks now. I was afraid you only saw me as someone who needed rescuing, someone you were obligated to help. You are so much more than that, Clayton said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. You walked away from everything to save yourself. You rebuilt your life from nothing. You are incredible, Lydia. And I would be honored if you would let me be part of your life, not as your rescuer, but as your equal, as your partner. Lydia found herself standing, crossing the small distance between them. Clayton stood too, and then his hands were cupping her face with infinite gentleness, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. May I kiss you? He asked, and she loved that he asked, loved that even now he was seeking her permission, her consent. Yes, she whispered. Please. The kiss was soft and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they broke apart, both of them were smiling. So I can court you then? Clayton asked. You can, Lydia confirmed. Although I think we may have been courting already, without calling it that. I suppose we have, Clayton agreed, looking pleased. But I want to do this right. I want to take you to dances in town and on picnics and all the things I should have done before telling you I love you. I would like that, Lydia said, although I think I already know how this courtship is going to end. How is that? With me saying yes when you ask me to marry you? Clayton laughed, a sound of pure joy. Well then, I will have to make sure I ask properly when the time comes. The courtship that followed was everything Lydia had never had with Marcus. Clayton took her into Marfa for Saturday evening dances, where they whirled around the floor until they were breathless and laughing. He took her on long rides across the desert, showing her the secret places he had discovered in his years working the land. A hidden spring where wildflowers grew in impossible profusion, a rock formation that glowed red in the sunset, a valley where antelope gathered at dawn. He brought her books to read, and they would spend evenings on his porch discussing poetry and philosophy and their dreams for the future. And through it all, he treated her with a respect and tenderness that made her fall more deeply in love with him every day. He never tried to control her, never told her what to think or how to feel. He asked her opinion on everything from what to cook for dinner to larger questions about politics and morality. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and valued her thoughts. Ruth became a friend as well as an employer, delighting in the romance developing under her roof. She took Lydia into Marfa and bought her new dresses, refusing to let Lydia pay. Consider it my wedding gift in advance, Ruth said with a wink. The divorce from Marcus was finalized in September. Lydia felt nothing but relief when the papers were delivered. That chapter of her life was closed, and she was free to begin a new one. On a cool evening in late October, as the desert air finally began to lose its summer heat, Clayton took Lydia on a ride to watch the sunset. They stopped at the top of a rise that overlooked miles of open country, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple and gold. This is my favorite place, Clayton said. I come here when I need to think or when I need to remember why I love this land so much. It is beautiful, Lydia agreed. Lydia, I brought you here because I wanted you to see this. Because if you say yes to what I am about to ask, this will be our land, our future. Lydia's breath caught as Clayton dismounted and helped her down from her horse. He took both her hands in his, and she felt the calluses on his palms, the strength in his fingers. I have been saving money for years, he said, and I have finally saved enough to buy my own ranch. A small place, just a few hundred acres, but it is good land with water and grazing. I put in an offer last week, and it was accepted. I take possession in December. Clayton, that is wonderful, Lydia said, thrilled for him. It would be more wonderful if you were there with me, Clayton said. Not as my cook or my housekeeper, but as my wife, as my partner in building something together. Lydia Zimmerman, I love you with everything I am. You are the strongest, kindest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. Will you marry me? Yes, Lydia said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times, yes. Clayton pulled a ring from his pocket, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect sapphire. This was my mother's, he said. My father gave it to her when they married. I would be honored if you would wear it. He slipped it onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Lydia looked at the ring, then at Clayton, and felt like her heart might burst with happiness. I love you, she said. I love you so much, Clayton Thorne. He kissed her then, deep and sure, and Lydia knew she was finally, truly home. They were married in Marfa on a bright December morning, with Ruth and her husband standing as witnesses. Dr. Pierce was there, along with several of Clayton's friends from the various ranches in the area. Lydia wore a dress of deep blue that brought out the color of her eyes, and Clayton wore his best suit, looking handsome and happy and slightly uncomfortable in the formal clothes. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher asked if she took Clayton as her husband, Lydia said, I do, with a clarity and certainty she had never felt before. This was right. This was real. This was the life she was choosing, with the man she loved. After the ceremony, there was a celebration at the hotel in town, with food and music and dancing. Lydia danced with her new husband and with Ruth's husband and with several of the ranch hands who congratulated her shyly. She felt like she was floating, like this was all a beautiful dream. But it was not a dream. It was real. She was married to Clayton, and they were going to build a life together on their own land. They moved to the new ranch the following week. It was a small operation with a modest house that needed some fixing up, a barn, and several outbuildings. The land stretched out in gentle rises, with good grass and a creek that ran year-round. It was not grand or impressive, but it was theirs, and that made it perfect. Lydia threw herself into making the house a home. She sewed curtains for the windows, painted the walls, planted a garden that she swore would rival Ruth's come summer. Clayton worked from dawn to dusk, mending fences, tending to the small herd of cattle he had purchased, breaking a couple of young horses to saddle. They worked together, partners in every sense of the word. At night, they would collapse into bed, exhausted and happy, and Clayton would hold her close and tell her about his plans for the ranch. He wanted to build it slowly, carefully, into something sustainable and profitable. He wanted to raise good cattle, to treat his land with respect, to maybe take on a few ranch hands once they could afford it, and someday, he hoped, to fill the house with children. How many children? Lydia asked, smiling in the darkness. As many as you want, Clayton said. Or as few. I just want a family with you, Lydia. However that looks. I want children too, Lydia said. I want them to grow up here, in this house, on this land. I want them to grow up knowing they can speak freely, that their opinions matter, that they are loved and valued. I want them to have everything I did not have. They will, Clayton promised. We will make sure of it. The first years of their marriage were hard work, but they were happy. The ranch slowly began to prosper under Clayton's careful management. Lydia's garden flourished, providing them with fresh vegetables and enough surplus to sell in town. They bought chickens and pigs, and Lydia learned to make butter and cheese that was highly prized at the Marfa market. In the spring of their second year of marriage, Lydia discovered she was expecting a child. Clayton was over the moon with joy, treating her like she was made of spun glass. She laughed at his concern, but was touched by it too. This was what a husband should be, she thought: caring, protective without being controlling, involved and excited about their growing family. Their son was born in November of 1883 during a cold snap that had Clayton nervously pacing outside while Ruth and Dr. Pierce attended to Lydia. The birth was long and difficult, but when it was over and Lydia held her son in her arms, she felt a love so fierce it almost frightened her. They named him James, after Clayton's father. He was a healthy baby with a powerful set of lungs and his father's dark hair. Clayton held him with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Clayton whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Lydia. Thank you for giving me this gift." "We made him together," Lydia said, smiling despite her exhaustion. "He is our gift." James grew into a sturdy, curious toddler who followed his father around the ranch like a devoted shadow. When he was 2, Lydia became pregnant again, and their daughter Caroline was born in the spring of 1886. She was a sweet-natured baby with Lydia's blonde hair and a smile that could light up a room. The ranch continued to grow. By 1887, Clayton had enough success that he was able to take on 2 full-time ranch hands, young men who were learning the trade and grateful for the fair wages and respectful treatment. The herd had grown to nearly 300 head, and Clayton was becoming known in the area for his quality cattle and his honest dealings. Lydia divided her time between caring for the children, tending her garden, and helping Clayton with the ranch accounts. She had discovered she had a head for numbers, and she kept meticulous records of their income and expenses, helping Clayton make informed decisions about where to invest and where to economize. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Clayton took Lydia back to the rise where he had proposed. The children were with Ruth for the evening, giving them a rare moment alone together. "Do you remember when I brought you here?" Clayton asked, his arm around her waist as they watched the sunset. "I remember everything about that day," Lydia said. "I remember being so happy I thought I might burst. I remember thinking that finally my life was beginning." "Are you still happy?" Clayton asked. "Truly?" "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Lydia said honestly. "This life we have built, Clayton, it is everything I ever dreamed of and so much more. We have a home, a family, work that matters. We have each other. I could not ask for anything more. I think about that day I found you on the road sometimes," Clayton said quietly. "About what might have happened if I had ridden past, if I had not stopped. And I thank God every day that I did stop. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Lydia, you and our children. You are my whole world." "And you are mine," Lydia said, turning to kiss him. "You saved my life, Clayton. Not just that day on the road, but every day since. You showed me what love really means, what partnership really looks like. You gave me back myself." They stood together as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant colors. In the distance, they could see their ranch, their home, smoke rising from the chimney where they would return to check on their sleeping children and bank the fire for the night. Life was not perfect. There were still hard days, difficult seasons, setbacks and struggles, but they faced everything together, as partners, as equals, as 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. Lydia sometimes thought about the woman she had been, walking down that dusty road with a broken hand and broken dreams. She thought about how terrified she had been, how certain that her life was over. And she marveled at how wrong she had been. Her life had not been over. It had been just beginning. Years passed and their family continued to grow. They had 2 more children, another son named Thomas born in 1889, and a daughter named Margaret in 1892. The ranch prospered, expanding to over 1,000 acres by the mid-1890s. They built a larger house to accommodate their growing family, but they kept the original house standing as a guest cottage, a reminder of where they had started. James grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. Caroline was bright and curious, always asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. Thomas was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and coming home muddy and grinning. And Margaret was the baby, sweet and affectionate, who wanted nothing more than to help her mother in the garden and the kitchen. Lydia watched her children grow with a fierce pride and protectiveness. She made sure they knew they were loved, that their voices mattered, that they could speak freely about anything. She and Clayton raised them to be kind and respectful, to work hard, but also to value education and learning. They had a tutor come from Marfa 3 days a week to teach the children, and Lydia supplemented those lessons with her own teaching, particularly in literature and history. On summer evenings, the whole family would gather on the porch, and Clayton would tell stories of the old days when he was just starting out as a ranch hand. Lydia would tell stories too, though hers were carefully edited versions of her past. The children knew that she had been married before, and that it had not been a happy marriage, but they did not know the details. Those were scars that had healed, and Lydia saw no reason to reopen them. Ruth remained a close friend throughout the years, visiting often and doting on the children like a grandmother. She was there for every birthday, every holiday, always bearing gifts and stories and laughter. When her husband passed away in 1895, Clayton and Lydia were there to support her, and Ruth eventually sold her ranch and moved into the guest cottage on their property, where she lived happily as an unofficial member of their family. In 1898, when James was 15, a stranger came to the ranch asking for Lydia. She was in the garden with Margaret when Clayton came to fetch her, his face serious. "There is a man here to see you," he said. "Says he has a message from your former husband." Lydia's blood ran cold. She had not heard from Marcus or Robert in nearly 17 years. She had assumed they had forgotten about her, moved on with their lives. "What does he want?" she asked. "He did not say. Only that he needs to speak with you. I am right here if you need me." Lydia wiped her hands on her apron and went with Clayton to the front of the house. A young man stood there, hat in his hands, looking nervous. "Mrs. Thorne?" he asked. "I am sorry to bother you. My name is David Zimmerman. Marcus Zimmerman was my father." Lydia felt the world tilt. "Was? He passed away 2 months ago. Pneumonia. And my grandfather, Robert, passed 3 years before that. I only just learned of your existence when I was going through my father's papers. He left you something in his will." "I do not want anything from him," Lydia said firmly. "It is not money or property," David said quickly. "It is a letter. He asked that it be delivered to you after his death, and he left a sum of money to cover any debts he might have owed you, but he instructed that it be given only if you chose to accept it. He said you would understand." Lydia looked at Clayton, who squeezed her hand supportively. "All right," she said. "I will take the letter." David handed her an envelope, yellowed with age. He wrote it many years ago, from what I can tell. He kept it in his desk drawer all this time. "Thank you for bringing it," Lydia said. "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you, madam." David hesitated. "If I may say so, my father was not a happy man. He married twice more after you, but neither marriage lasted. He drank too much and shut himself away from the world. I think he carried a lot of regrets. I hope that letter brings you some peace." After David left, Lydia took the letter to her favorite spot by the creek and opened it with shaking hands. Clayton had offered to come with her, but she needed to do this alone. The letter was dated 1885, just 2 years after they had divorced. "Lydia, I do not expect you to forgive me. I do not even expect you to read this, but I needed to write it anyway. I have thought often of you over the past years, and I am filled with shame and regret. I was a coward. I stood by and let my father hurt you, and I did nothing. I told myself I was keeping the peace, that confronting him would only make things worse. But the truth is, I was afraid. I have always been afraid of my father, and my cowardice cost you dearly. You deserved a husband who would stand up for you, who would protect you, who would value you as the remarkable woman you are. Instead, you got me, a weak man who chose the easy path of silence over the hard path of righteousness. I heard that you remarried to a rancher named Clayton Thorne. I heard that you are happy, that you have children, that you have built a good life. I am glad. You deserve all the happiness in the world. I hope you know that what happened was not your fault. You were never the problem. I was. My father was. You were brave and strong and good, and you deserved so much better than what we gave you. I am sorry, Lydia. I am so, so sorry. I hope you have found the life and the love you always deserved. Marcus. Lydia sat for a long time, the letter in her lap, tears streaming down her face. They were not tears of sadness exactly, more like tears of release, of closure. Marcus had finally done what he should have done all those years ago. He had taken responsibility. He had acknowledged the wrong that had been done. It did not change the past. It did not undo the pain. But somehow it helped. It allowed her to fully let go of any lingering anger or hurt she might have been carrying. When she returned to the house, Clayton was waiting on the porch. She went to him and let him hold her while she cried. He apologized, she said when she could speak. After all these years, he finally apologized. That must have been hard to read, Clayton said gently. It was, but it was also good, in a strange way. It is closure. It is the end of that chapter once and for all. What do you want to do with the money he left? Lydia thought about it. I want to use it to start a fund for women who need help leaving bad situations. Women like I was. We can work with Dr. Pierce and Ruth to identify women who need assistance, and we can help them. We can give them what was given to me, a chance at a new life. That is a beautiful idea, Clayton said. Let us do it. And they did. Over the following years, the fund helped dozens of women escape abusive situations, providing them with money for doctors, for lawyers, for new starts. Lydia became known in the area as someone who would help, no questions asked. She opened her home to women who needed a safe place to stay, and she worked with other families to find them employment and housing. It became her passion, her way of honoring the girl she had been and the man who had saved her. The children grew and eventually began lives of their own. James took over management of the ranch, marrying a sweet girl from town and building his own house on the property. Caroline went to normal school and became a teacher, fulfilling the dream Lydia had once had for herself. Thomas joined the cavalry and saw the world before returning home to help his brother run the ranch. And Margaret married a kind young doctor and moved to El Paso, though she visited often with her growing family. Clayton and Lydia grew old together, their love deepening with every passing year. They marked their 25th anniversary, their 30th, their 35th. They became grandparents many times over, and their home was always full of noise and laughter and children. On their 40th anniversary in 1921, Clayton took Lydia once more to the rise where he had proposed. They were both in their 60s now, graying and slowed by age, but their love was as strong as ever. I have been thinking about that day I found you on the road, Clayton said, echoing words he had said so many years before. Do you remember how terrified you were? How hurt? I remember, Lydia said. I remember thinking my life was over, that I would never be happy again. And now? And now I know that day was not an ending. It was a beginning, the beginning of everything good in my life. She took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that was still there despite his age. You gave me back my life, Clayton. You taught me what love really means. and you have given me 40 years of happiness. You gave me just as much, Clayton said. You made me a better man. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to wake up grateful every morning. I love you, Lydia Thorne. I have loved you for 40 years, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Lydia said, always and forever. They stood together on that rise, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on, surrounded by the legacy of love they had created. And Lydia thought about the young woman she had been, broken and scared on a dusty road. She thought about how a stranger's kindness had changed everything, how 5 simple words, "speak freely here," had opened the door to a life she had never imagined possible. She had spoken freely. She had lived freely. She had loved freely. And it had made all the difference.